nature of what's coming through. And this really is about reconnecting back to who we are, and to get away from the distractions of technology, and start listening to our instinct again, plugging us back in, and making us aware of what we should be more concerned about.
That's very deep and meaningful there. Sort of, and sort of, is there something that's sort of coming up for you with regards to that search? Is it sort of is about stilling ourselves, or is it being more aware, more connected with the land, more connected with the genus loci?
I think for the reader, it's about being aware who we are, and understanding our own biology when we're dealing with this phenomena, and about how aspects of the phenomena, when it does interact with us, what it's doing to us on a biological level, and how we need to watch for that and be aware of it. It's exceptionally subtle, and looks about how do we turn that around? What are our actual defenses? We have to set our boundaries, and what are those boundaries, and how do we set them? So that's really what it looks at, and it looks at it really pulls out examples of interaction that we have had over the past 100 years with this phenomenon in all its multifacets, because there's a huge amount of the phenomena, has appeared to us in various different forms. But what we ended up doing was ignoring the mask in which it interacts with us. Because when we tried to track the mask back, we were getting really nowhere. What we ended up doing was tracked it by phenomena in the way that it interacted with us, and that allowed us to go back hundreds and thousands of years. So it was interesting to see how long this phenomena has been interacting with the human race, and into prehistory. All the way back through into Sumerian, and beyond. And of course, we lose track of it there. But for all indications, for the past thousands of years, it's been very much there with us, walking alongside us.
Yeah, those are very deep concepts, and it's very evocative. So many questions sort of even arise for those along. I mean, we were discussing sort of before sort of the conversation here about the work of your local archaeologist, Dr. Marion Dowd, and I
Mm,
mean
mm,
she's done some phenomenal work where she deals sort of in the hollow places and so forth in her excavations, going back through millennia, sort of seeing what she can see. And some of the stuff is more modern, but some of the stuff is kind of tragic. But a lot of what she's finding in these caves are kind of like ritual kind of stuff that sort of where people are going into the caves and not even just for somewhere to live or shelter, but actually they're finding sort of deep sort of ritual sort of uses. And she would talk about the sheep. She's very evocative when she talks. She's not your standard archaeologist. She just throws the
yeah,
kitchen sink at it. So she's very passionate about the whole spirituality part of it too.
yeah, she is, and I think to give credit where credit's due, Marion does have that natural instinct, which I think is vital to merge science and connect to our ancestry. I think it's vital to have both sides there, to try and understand what they were doing, back in the day. And I think that is a practice, I think, working with archaeologists, of course, in the modern day. um, I've seen and I've spoken to archaeologists who also use that, but they can't say that they're using that. That would interfere with their funding and everything else. And it was kind of regretful to hear them say that, I'll tell you what I believe, but I can't, you can't repeat this. And we've had long conversations, and they share the sentiments that I've been seeing and working within my own research. But they can't publicly say that, because it would affect their careers. which is unfortunate. But it's amazing how this these whispers from the void um, do help people in like scientists who have problems and have gone to sleep and had the answers to their difficult situations given to them in their dreams and things like that. And my father was always one for saying, if you've got a problem, go to sleep on it, and you'll have the answer in the morning. And he was always true. It always worked out when you connect with it and you're willing to listen. I think that that's very important.
Yes, absolutely. There's there's two issues that sort of come for me. If sort of I'm going off at a tangent here, I totally agree with everything that you're saying because it is people are sort of they're dipping into sort of their whole spirituality side of things, and I think that's what Marion kind of covers when she says whenever she's going down into the caves and she goes deep down into those caves, like some of them are like a quarter of a kilometer long,
Oh yeah.
so
Mhm.
and very deep. And she said that literally, you connect completely with spirituality whenever you're dealing with these things. So, but
You do.
I was sort of, I was thinking about there's other aspects of spirituality, and there's other aspects of sort of even in terms of whenever we're talking about the she and fairy sightings, being
Mhm.
sort of really what and the old gods in terms of what is it that we're dealing with here. Like with it, I had a conversation there very interesting with Miles Johnson.
Mhm.
And with several other people, but one of the things that comes up is some people think that there's maybe a crossover between the likes of the fairy lights are those ETs? What are we looking at
Mm.
here? Are we dealing
Mm.
with or is it the one and the same, or is there a crossover between the two? And I'm also thinking about sort of the way that we're interpreting sites of in terms of the likes of a guy called Michael Tellinger, and he was doing some work, very
Mm.
interesting work over in Africa about the singing stones, and
Yes.
it kind of he says that they're giants within the land, literally,
Mm.
and sort of you would be familiar with Belfast and sort of Napoleon's nose and all that, all
Mhm.
these sort of
Mhm. Mhm.
we're familiar with our own giants within the landscape, and
Mhm.
wondering how many of them actually are maybe are more plausible than what we thought. I mean, sort of even if you go to the likes of sort of south the south of England, you have sort of Durdledore and all of these great sort
Mhm.
of dragon kind of stones, sort
Mhm.
of falling into the sea. Sort
Yeah.
of what is your take on all of this?
Um, the work that I've been doing over the past 10 years has been accumulating data and information to look at the various different sources of input from aliens to fairies to jinn, back into the incubus, succubus, all of that particular type of stuff. And again, what I see those as are masks. They're the way in which it wishes to be interpreted. And sometimes it can be masks that we apply to the phenomena, which only serves to create this facade that can be difficult for people to break through. But in principle, the work itself would suggest that this is all coming from the same source, and that's intriguing, especially when we go back and we start looking at the rocks themselves and the way that the phenomena is appearing, and the history of the phenomena in that it appears on rock plateaus, near cliff faces, or in cliff faces, cave systems, and things again. About how this phenomena seems to leach through the cave or through the rocks, the strata. Um, and for that, when we go back and we look at the likes of the Banshee, I wrote a book there some time ago called Banshee, and we wanted to go back and have a look and interview people around Ireland today as to whether this phenomena still occurs today. And I have to say, I was openly shocked to find people who were still having experiences of the Banshee. People say that, oh, the Banshee, especially from the skeptical lineages, that they'll say that the Banshee is nothing but a fox calling for her mate, or a hare caught in a trap, or maybe some lady out in the street who's had a little bit too much of the old tipsy, and she's let a scream out of her. That is not the case, because when I put pen to paper within the first introduction of the book, I was living down here in Sligo, and I got to hear the Banshee for myself. And that taught me a very valuable lesson, because within that scream that was delivered, my instinct immediately activated. And this cry is like nothing else. I've heard it now 3 times, and I can tell you that every time that I've heard it, I recognize it straight away. I understand that there's a message. But more importantly is that this scream, when it happens, it kickstarts our fight or flight. Immediately we're put on high alert, because within the scream there is a valuable lesson. Be warned, death is coming. And in some kind of a way, it was strange that within writing that book, I got to see a different take on the Banshee, almost maybe a permission from her part. Okay, you can write this, because within that I got to see that there was an aspect of empathy with her. I was righting some wrongs that had been done, especially from the United States, that claimed that the Banshee hadn't been heard since the 1940s. And for anyone who heard the Banshee, they were going to die. That's not the case. In fact, it was quite the opposite. It was a case of, yes, she is still heard, and the ones who are around understand that death is coming, but the person who is dying does not hear the scream. Can you imagine if you're lying on your deathbed and suddenly you hear the Banshee at your window? My God, that would be an awful way to go, listening to that. But the person doesn't hear it. And that in itself, it showed that there was an aspect, there was an element of empathy there that she understood. And I found it wonderfully interesting, but also her connection to the rocks, because in his day, we have this modern translation, Banshee, woman of the fairy, but actually she wasn't in reference to the fairy. She was the stone mounds in which they came through. The ancient Neolithic mounds in which they come through are the she. So when we say Banshee, it's woman of the mounds, not woman of the fairy. They were people of the mounds. So that gets us to change our direction, our perspective, on these beings, these entities, this energy that seems to penetrate from the rock up into where we are today. And when we start looking at that, we find other different aspects of this phenomena coming through. But we have to be careful with what comes through, and understand why the mounds were built and what they represented. That was very important. But to understand what they represented, we have to go all the way back into the Ubidian culture, back into the Near East, and see there that these ancient mounds, the mound builders, began there and started moving east, or west, and they followed the sun, and took that technology with them. And the idea that the Nordics, of course, they had said that these mounds were ancestral. They were going back, and there were these places of sacred ancestral worship where you could connect with the ancestors. It was correct to a point, because to understand these mounds, these she, we have to understand us and who we are. And through the Nordic traditions, they brought the body to the stone mounds where the soul decoupled The spirit was gone at that point. At point of death, the spirit leaves, but the soul remained. And it's interesting that through the modern perceptions that we have of soul and spirit, it's very interchangeable. But that's where it shouldn't have happened, because they're two separate elements. And the soul, when it decoupled from the body, whether it be days to weeks, when it left and began to enter these massive stone chambers, it was known to go through this state of metempsychosis. It changed into a serpent and moved back into the mounds. And with it, it took the knowledge of what it learned, the knowledge of what it experienced, back into the void. And so when we have these huge stone mounds, in which we certainly were using the feminine aspect, the oracle, if you like, to communicate, the gatekeepers of the knowledge were giant serpents that came through at specific times of the year, because these chambers were orientated. It also used the frequency of the sun, and when we were to activate. And also there was another key component, which was the cone. The cone possessed elements that, when consumed, shifted us when we entered these chambers. It almost decoupled us. You were half in the body, half out. And that's when you had this experience and you gained the knowledge that was relayed through the oracle. So you have key components there. You have the sound of a particular drum beat, that was very important. You have the sun entering the chamber, and when the sun entered the chamber was very important, because when it went down into the lower atmosphere, the sun naturally filters. So you're not getting the complete sunlight coming into the filter or coming into the chamber. You're getting a key frequency entering the chamber. You also have vibration, which was very important, especially through a type of almost resembling Mongolian throat music or chant, at very, very low frequency. So those were the activations, along with the cone, were very, very important. But what were these places? And from my own work, I'm seeing that these particular mounds, these places where our ancestors went back to, were places that it in itself was a huge receptacle of the soul. And we see this from the Akkadian wall art in Mesopotamia, where you've got these huge creatures, semi-gods, if you like, with the eagle heads and human bodies, holding the cone, giving across to either the priests or the high kings, and holding this handbag, this little tiny bag, which in itself is universal. You know, that little bag appears from the Middle East, across all the way across the world into the Olmec civilization in Western in the Americas. You see this image of the bag in Turkey, and you also see it there. This image of this little purse that always seems to appear, and we wonder what on earth is that purse. The purse, which is why it's being held by the semi-god with the wings, which represents the void. The wings represented the void. This was this aspect of spirit, soul. It was being held by the semi-god. It was held. It represented the mounds. The bag was the mounds. The mounds are the representation of the place the souls returned. And when we go to Sardinia, there's a beautiful monument there, which is for everyone to see, but its orientation is to the setting sun on the solstice. But the entrance to this chamber, which originally would have been a huge stone mound, the entrance to the chamber is in the shape of the purse. It's a carved purse. These places were the receptacle of the souls. So that's where the souls returned. This aspect of us that lived with us, that decoupled after death, and returned with the knowledge. So there we have access. We have references within the paranormal and things like that to the global consciousness, or the what else do they call it now, the Akashic records. Those that particular knowledge bank was something that was seen to retract back within the void. But not all that comes from the void is good. So that's why we need to understand what we're dealing with, and that's something that I'm working on with this new publication, Staring into Darkness. It's really delving into that. But the she. So to get back to this aspect of the fairy, I've been in locations where I have seen these things appear. They're not like the Cottingley fairies of Victorian England. They're nothing like that at all. In fact, if anything, they appeared just like you and me. And I was actually spending my time on location in a place that was known for this type of activity. I was alone. I was on top of the mountain. In fact, I was my retreat for the evening was an old collapsed stone chamber, and behind me, around 130 feet away, was another stone chamber. Now, as I lay down, I was taking notes of weather and wind and speed and everything else, and what time it was. And as the blood moon rose over the back of the mountains, I became aware of three late teenagers who had started to walk around the side of the second passage chamber, which I assumed had already collapsed as well. And they were wearing fleece tops. That's how clear I was able to see them. They were wearing fleece tops, looked like three normal teenagers, and they were very lean, and they were walking with natural walking sticks. And I thought to myself, well, now I must speak to those people, because they may have seen something which would be very interesting for me to include in a publication. Now, as I turned my head to put my notepad away, I became aware that I had been seen. You get this feeling, the feeling suddenly they've noticed me, because all of, even though I was sitting down low in this collapsed chamber, my head was up above the wall. So as my head turned, they seen the movement. And I said, no, I must go down and speak to them. And as I turned to get up, these people were gone. Now, I couldn't explain it because I could see 6 miles in any direction. They were wearing fleece tops with primary colors. I could have seen them for miles away. And yet these people were gone. No explanation. I don't know how it happened. But later that evening, I was standing on top of the chamber, and my camera was messing around with me. I couldn't get the flash to switch off. Every time I wanted to take a photograph, it would flash. And I was very cognizant that I was sitting on top of this bloody hill where people would see these flashes going off for miles, and they'd think, my God, the fairies are back on the top of the hill. So I was working with that, and as I lifted my head, 2 people were walking away from me. And I thought, that's impossible, because my peripheral vision is fantastic. No way they could have got past, because to do that, they would have to have walked straight by the passage chamber I was on. And I looked at them and I thought, I was stunned. And one was taller than the other, and they were wearing different colored jackets. And they walked through a flock of sheep that were sitting down. And I thought, how did they do that? Because if I walk anywhere near the sheep, they're gone. And I lifted the binoculars to have a look at them. And through the binoculars, I could only see one. And I thought, what's going on here? I thought I had actually broken the binoculars, and I set them down and I looked and I could see 2. I thought, okay, something's not right here. And as I knew that they were about to go over the edge, it was quite a sharp drop where they were going. And I said, I have to get this shot. And I activated the camera and I took the shot. And within the shot, one appears. The second one does not. And within that, I learned my lesson that the reason a lot, in fact, a majority of this phenomena does not like cameras, because at that particular point, they'd already hooked me. And it was a conscious connection that they had made. They were portraying themselves as two, but the camera only saw one. They can't work with the technology, but they can corrupt my perception of what is going on the outside. And it was a very interesting photograph. It was one of those things. But that in itself was one of the examples that I've had with this phenomena that leaves through the rocks. But again, this is something that we see right around the planet. And the shining ones are another. My nemesis are another one that seems to penetrate from this source. And it's interesting how we react to them, and how we don't listen to those initial signals. For me, it's very important to understand the 20-second rule, in which when we come into contact with this phenomenon, in whichever mask it decides to use, we listen to our instinct. And if our bodies react within the first 20 seconds, in other words, does your soul activate your fight or flight? That's very important to understand what's going on. If it activates the fight or flight and it manifests through that, then you know there's trouble here. This is not what it's portraying itself to be. So within those moments, within those first 20 seconds, your body's reacting to this. If there's no reaction at all, you're fine. There is no threat here whatsoever. If it does react, then listen. And I see that right across the board, whether it be in connection with the Fae, whether it be in connection with the Jinn, even UFOs and aliens. I have found this unusual connection that seems to bind them together, and that connection actually is their reaction to iron, and that aspect that. If we even cross reference there to the incubus succubus attacks, and the likes, that these attacks happen to women more so than men, but they'll attack whenever the women enter their monthly cycles, and the majority can become anemic. They wait until that point. And this is something I've seen throughout my investigative years. And I've seen the presence of iron, and how even the greys react to that. And I often thought to myself, if something is coming from wherever reticuli or whatever the hell it is that they say they come from, why do they share the same common fear of iron? If there's an iron amulet around your neck, why are they afraid? Just like the jinn, just like the fairy, just like the succubus and the incubus. Why are they all afraid of that? What's that common fear? Are they coming from the same source? Are we looking at something that is coming from the same source? And that to me was very, very interesting to see how they reacted to this. But getting back to this appearance and how they come through stone and things like that, one perfect example of that is Lourdes, and how at the very beginning that this presence made itself known within the cave at Lourdes, and was standing. It made itself, it came out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And Bernadette, she was there. She was watching it, and looking at her notes, the original notes at the very beginning. Was very, very telling, because she was obviously listening to her instinct. She didn't know what it was. She didn't think that it was Our Lady of Lourdes who had come. She referred to it as that thing. Hardly something that you're going to call Mary, the mother of Jesus. No, she referred it as that thing. And that later became changed into what we know today, and people still go there and have their experiences. But it's interesting to note that as many positive experiences that happen at Lord's, there are also equally negative experiences that happen. That balances itself out. But you rarely hear tell of that. And we see this aspect of the Shining Ones. They, again, I call them a nemesis. It's something that I chase around the world, and Ireland has gone through its spate of the Shining Ones appearing all over the place, especially in the 1990s. And my big thing is to analyze this stuff. We have to analyze the reaction of the people that saw it initially, and that's very telling. When you've got something that's coming into the place that the sanctity of your home, and it's telling you, don't be afraid. No, you need to be afraid at that point. And I remember I was at a lecture being held in the UK, and this lady, she was talking about how the aliens had come through her window, and she couldn't move, and they done this stuff, and they left, and she laughed whenever she said, and it was very funny. My cat had wet the bed, and I pointed out. I said that was the clue to the nature of the phenomena that you interacted with. You should have listened. Your cat was afraid. You ignored your own sense, but your animal didn't. And that was very telling with the phenomena. So the 20-second rule is always something that I would live by. If I come across an encounter, I think to myself, okay, how am I reacting to this? I listen to that instinct, and I reconnect with that, and we have to understand the phenomena. How can we tell if ghosts are she that we feel brush by us?
Yeah.
The feeling is very, very similar. And what I tend to see, if we're moving into their areas, if we're hiking or whatever, and we come into their areas, there are some telltale signs I have found, like trees that will grow out of the ground, bend over, and then grow back down onto the ground. So you've got this arch that naturally occurs. I've been in many locations where that will occur. And in fact, one location near me, I was investigating about several months ago, and the only way I could get onto it was via the boat. And it was this piece of headland. It was very hard to get onto. It was very, very dense hedgerow and things around the water's edge, and very deep. And there was only one point on which I could get on. So tied off the boat, climbed up the bank, and it was on my hands and knees whenever I got through onto the first campsite, and turned around, and this arch was there. And I thought, what's the chances of that? Of the only place that you could enter this place, and there's a fairy arch that I had to crawl through to get onto it. And we run some tests there. We were able to see that there were distortions in time within that particular area. There were also problems with radiation, actually background radiation. There were issues happening there. But when the investigation ended, I wanted to come back and spend the night there, and see what was going to happen. So loaded the boat back up again, returned back to dock, and returned again about 3 weeks later. And when I got back, that's whenever I seen clearly that invite was gone. Two massive trees had fallen over and crossed each other, and completely blocked the entrance. So there was no longer any way that I could get onto that particular location. The fairy wind and the she are, it's in itself is very, very similar. To experience it, it's very, very difficult to try and tell someone, okay, this is the difference between ghost and she. because it's a response that we have to experience, and to experience it, we have to get back onto the land. Um, and It'd be very, very difficult to try and differentiate those two aspects. Um, the she in itself, you know, obviously you're identifying the she and the fairy wind as being the two and the same. Um, that in itself is very, very similar. Um, I find it very, very difficult to try and break the two things apart in that aspect.
Oh,
Again, how we activate would be very, very difficult. Now, entrances to Agartha hollow places, yes, there are places in which that can happen. I've been to one location, in fact, where again it's this cave complex where this portal is said to be. We've had great results there, and in fact, timing is everything. Like most things when you're dealing with aspects of the she, timing is everything. Um, and we were there just on the other side of sunset when, as the camera was rolling, this woman's voice just rose from this particular cave complex. Now she's spoken a language that I had no idea. I've never ever heard the like of that before, and I've traveled many places around the world, but I've never heard that particular language before. But we were able to record it, and that was a again, a very rare event. Um, but these places, yes, you can go to, you can have your experiences. Many people will have their experiences um, by sheer luck most times. But again, when we're looking at the likes of, say, flat land with grass and everything on it, we have to be aware of what's under the grass. Are we looking at rocks again? Are we got this connection to the rocks? David Paulides, an author in the States, he was a prolific writer, and he wrote Missing 411, in which people go missing in the state parks in the United States. Huge amounts of people mysteriously disappear under very, very unusual circumstances. One moment you're talking to your friend, you turn back and you look around again, and your friend's gone. No trace of disappearance, no sign of struggle, no blood, nothing. They're just gone. And it was very interesting from his perspective that he mentioned that the majority of people who disappear at boulder fields. We're back to the rocks. And also that something strange that coincides with this as well are the magnetic anomalies. And this is something that we can see from the satellite imagery. We can point out particular strengths of magnetic anomalies in various different locations right around the planet. But within key areas, we see patterns develop. And you've got the positive magnetic anomalies, where typically, historically, you tend to find a lot of the phenomena, whether it be cryptids, whether it be poltergeist phenomena, UFOs. You get a broad range of phenomena appears within these particular areas, these key areas. And if you take, for instance, all the key areas in the United States that phenomena is known to happen, you'll probably find that a huge majority of those appear in positive magnetic anomalies. However, of course, there's the other edge of the sword, in which you have the negative magnetic anomalies. And these areas are unusual in themselves because 7 out of 10 of the world's top suicide locations appear in negative magnetic anomalies. These places, these are places where people are being called to end their lives, which also reflects in that a lot of these ancient stone structures that are built by our ancestors are also found within the the negative magnetic anomalies. A lot of blood worship was going on there, although smaller. It was going on. And when you bring that into the modern age, it's and keep in mind, of course, that you also have this aspect of blood worship from our ancestral past that went on there. They're appeasing something, Within the modern age, you find the majority of weapons manufacturing and development also happen within negative magnetic anomalies. And I say, what's the chances of that? And look at all those weapons that are being used to kill so many people around the world. Now, blood worship and bloodletting has gone to a new level that we have never seen before. But now, you mentioned here, Miles talked about a fairy portal beside St. Patrick's Stone in County Tyrone. That's correct. Yes, I've been there. St. Patrick's Chair, it's called, in Tyrone. But there is a particular cliff there. It's known as the Cliff of the Demons. And that's where St. Patrick said to expel the serpents that were being worshipped there back into the stone. It wasn't a case of St. Patrick walking the serpents to the edge of the cliffs and threw them into the ocean. That did not happen. It happened there. They were banished back into the rock. And I have to say that is a very, very strange place, because when you go there, it's a place where I've often found that when you enter into that particular forest, it's almost like it's out of sync. It feels different. The only way I can describe it is that it feels as if the time is different within that particular area. We've spent the night there. We've had our experiences there as well, but it's an absolutely fascinating place. Yes, Miles' friend. I'm aware of Miles' friend who went missing there, and the connection to ufology and everything else. But again, I err caution on this, because if the phenomena is coming from the same source, it will use whatever mask is appropriate to the individual, and what they will work with. But in the offset, it was known as the Cliff of the Demons, and that's where they were banished back into. But of course, it's a two-way doorway system there, so you can banish them all you want, but eventually they'll come back. What else have we got here? It's only a couple of miles from the burial site of Pharaoh King Menes, who returned home the setting sun from Egypt. Connection same day. Some say that all the iron on Earth came from meteors. No, that's actually not quite correct. All the iron didn't come from meteors. It's a very different isotope that's connected with meteors. But the Egyptians, they really valued meteoritic iron. It was more valuable than gold to the Egyptians. And we can see this aspect of that even within King Tut's dagger, which is made of meteoritic iron. It was seen as very, very powerful, and was something, of course, as we talked about before, that this connection of keeping the evil away, the evil eye, or any of the jinn or anything like that. And the jinn themselves, they're very famous within the Islamic texts, but they were also known as well within the Egyptian lore. And if you go to the Step Pyramid in Saqqara, they're also mentioned there. And alongside the gods that created the worlds, there was also this other species that was there, that were also labeled, and we would identify today as ghosts and demons. That's them. That's the ones that we're talking about. That's the ones that I would be hunting around all the place looking for. But what else have we got here? Any recent sightings of leprechauns? Leprechauns in themselves, certainly over in County Omeath, or certainly every March there you've got the leprechaun hunt. But I think within the aspect of leprechauns within Irish lore, there certainly weren't. They're not well represented as what we tend to see them today within sort of tourist shops and things like that with the little tiny men with green hats and everything else. And Dr. What was his name now? He's a researcher and author up in Coleraine. Dr. Bob. I can't remember his second name. Sorry, forgive me. But Dr. Bob, he wrote about the leprechauns, the original versions of the leprechauns, and they were mean SOBs. They stank to high heaven, and they had such a temper on them. So mending shoes, I don't think so. These things were serious. Bob Curran, that's him, Dr. Bob. I done a showdown with Bob down at Lepkessel. Very intriguing man. And I don't know if he's still with us or not, but he's very intriguing. Were the leprechauns Fomorians? It was stated a lot of the Fomorians were fairy, but the Fomorians, from historically, from what I understand, were the Greeks, Greek slaves, and lived around the shores of Ireland. So whether that was right or not, I don't know. The Firbolg, the bagmen, of course, were different again. So historically, I try and put some historical context onto these things. But initially, for me, it's about looking at the masks in which these things portray themselves to be, pushing the mask to the side, and see what we've got left. How do they interact with us? And where do they come from? That's very important. Where do they come from, and how do they get here? Ireland is very, very active, even within ufology. And I spoke to a person there. Oh my goodness! 3 years ago, down at Carrowkeel, the narrow quarter on Sligo, and 3 o'clock in the morning, she got up to get some water, and the back of the house faces Carrowkeel, and these things were there, flying back and forward, producing a grid pattern over the top of the chambers. So they were interested in something, and this is something that I see time and time again. That a lot of this phenomena, again, I keep going on about it, that it originates from the chambers and returns to the chambers, returns to the earth. Now, as for the mermaids, yes, there are legends in Sligo that speak of mermaids. We have the mermaid stones and things down there, but so far there have been no sightings of mermaids that have been anyway reliable. When we take the masks off, what are we dealing with? Are these energy spirits? They are a form of energy, yes. It seems that within us we have this aspect, that this soul, and the soul's responsibility is to look after the body, and all our psychic abilities, everything that we have, whether it be remote viewing, whether it be sensing spirits, whether it be whatever the case may be, all psychic abilities originate from the soul. And what we have, it seems through history, there was a what's known as the Great Divergence, and that was a serious interruption in the natural order of things, in which there was quite a bastion of this soul, after decoupled, that had no intention of returning to the void to shed its memories and essentially what do they call it in Monopoly? So I can't remember. Go back to go, or whatever it was called. But you start again, and they had no intentions of it. So all the memories that they had were not downloaded into the void. And it's interesting from the aspect of remote viewing. in that there are certain historical key points that happen in humanity's history that when we want to go back and look at those certain aspects of events, in fact, events not so long ago that took down a few buildings, um, there are key aspects of that history that cannot be viewed because that history has not gone back. It's kept here on this side. And there are ways in which those, I call them shadow, because they're out of the natural law or not out of the natural order. This aspect of shadow does not return. That knowledge does not return. That knowledge is accumulated on this side and protected, heavily protected. And this has been seen within the remote viewers. It cannot be penetrated. We're talking hundreds, if not thousands of years worth of information that has not gone back. And we tend to find this particular aspect of shadow transference will happen within family lines. Some people can, of course, offer themselves up for that. There are esoteric practices in which shadow can be passed on to another person. Within the esoteric field, the shadow can be passed on to a child. Usually, they tend to select a male under the age of 10, and preferably of the same family line. And this anchor point that is created between the child and the adult is usually a gift, a simple gift like a pen or a ring or whatever, and the child accepts, and that's it. That's all it is. And at the point of death, where the shadow decouples, it does not return to the void. Instead, it latches on. So when in the world of the paranormal, we hear tell of these things latching on, we call them oppression. We call them, I suppose we should call it for what it is. It's actually possession. These are the shadows that did not return. So that information is kept here. And we cannot access it. Those people have accumulated wealth, knowledge, power, in which this process continues, and it's just a cycle, goes over and over and over. They're not returning; they're getting more and more and more and more, and it's all about control. A lot of that control used to be within the God Kings, and that whole thing fell apart pretty quickly. But the ability to keep shadow here was very important. So what is shadow? Shadow is of the great divergence. It was a step away from the natural order in which when our souls decoupled, they naturally returned through the stone to the void, where they shed, and then they return at point of birth. So that's our she. Yeah, the gods of the void, the representations come in many variations. You've got the aspects of these semi-gods. We've already mentioned them in Akkadian artwork and things like that. But we also tend to see this crossover, and within the Sumerian artwork, we tend to see this two serpents entwining themselves, climbing up a stick. And I know that there used to be this claim that these were two serpents were a representation of the DNA. That is not what it was. If anything, that was a bastardization of what it actually represented, because what it represented was this aspect of the divergence and the natural order. You had two serpents that were fighting to the death. The souls are represented as serpents. And these things were being held in place by the spirits from the void. The void is a place of absolute nothing. absolute nothing. We know that from the skull experiments and what was coming through there, and numerous other inputs that describe this place of nothing. In fact, they describe it as a dimension not far from our own. Well, it's not actually dimensional; it's physical. There is a physical representation of this here. So when we talk about these things that they were already here, oh yeah, they're still here, and we know where, and that has caused quite a lot of stir when writing this next book, Staring into Darkness, because the moment that we discovered where it was, all hell broke loose. But that's a story for another day. Every stone in Ireland had special powers. Every stone everywhere, I suppose, in its technicality, would have special powers because of its inference to the receptacle of the souls. You know, there are places in which we did investigate, and we called the book Legend Seekers. And within that, it was a book that was designed to try and get our youth back into the countryside and away from the PlayStations and the Xboxes, and connect back into our landscape. And we give GPS coordinates, we give contact details of who owned the property and everything else. And there was one location where we actively said we can't do that. And in that, this was a place that we should not have been, as in man should not have been there. And it was intriguing when we looked at the archaeological history that surrounded this particular mountain. Mountains were very important to our ancestors. Line of sight was equally important, for your own safety and the safety of your community. And within this mountain, they didn't go on to it. There was no archaeological history on this mountain. There was plenty around it, but not on it. And that spoke volumes because of what was going on in this location. This location even murdered dogs. German shepherds were being murdered on site. These dogs were brought on to guard the location. People were being clubbed, and their fingers were being taken off with table saws, and rooms were being absolutely destroyed. And it got to a stage where they literally did have to close the mountain. And that's in Ireland. These locations exist, but again, it's a strange thing about Ireland. When something tends to be that bad, we don't talk about it, and we don't know where it is. So, but that, because of the nature of this particular place, we decided we can't let anyone go there. So we made that choice. Plenty of others, but if you want to see one of these particular places, I would highly recommend the Island of the Dead, which is in Donegal. And very, very interesting place. And it frightened the absolute bejesus out of me. But a highly intriguing place. And that was one of the locations actually that we were able to see the time differential within the event horizon of this doorway on the island. Absolutely intriguing to see that and have it recorded. But something went wrong there in that island. Something went horribly wrong. And even the church, whenever they took over, they tried to harness it. And people came there from all over medieval Europe to have their experience, which in itself was Neolithic. Have this experience with the serpent, if you like, these aspects of knowledge, which really in its heyday really should have been It shouldn't have been going on, within Christian belief. Eventually, the Pope closed it, and that's the way it goes. But Pot Noon, oh my goodness, I haven't been to Pot Noons in a long time. Loch Derg. Loch Derg is the island of the dead. So Saints Island, that's where you want to go, not Station Island. Station Island is the replication of Purgatory. Purgatory is the void. It's another name for the void, a place of absolute nothing. Yeah. Well, I can tell you, you'll have an experience there, all right. Enjoy. I stayed on the island once. I spent the night on it, and as I said, it scared the bejesus out of me. And I only went back in daylight 10 years later, and took the measurements on the island, and then got the hell off it again. And it's a dangerous lake to be on with a boat, so it's best if you've got a canoe or a Canadian canoe, because if you're in a motorboat, you'll get the engine destroyed. There's too many rocks there, so best with a canoe. I have a language specialist, which is a ancient language specialist, and he is exceptional. I'll get him to break that name down for me. It usually turns out to be something completely different from what we actually thought.
Yeah.
Etymology is wonderful, and we get a lot of our knowledge from the old townlands. I'm very resistant to deal with the Tuatha De Danann.
Really?
I tend to stay away from them. Again, historically looking at them and looking at the dates in which they were coming in. There's some controversial DNA analysis that has come out recently that has shown that the people who were building the passage chambers and the people before, or the people after, that lineage was wiped out. The male lineage was wiped out. The people who were wiping them out would have been the Tuatha De Danann. That was savage, because the history was gone. An oral tradition was destroyed. And looking at the historical records and things like that, and the DNA speaks volumes. We've got a group of people coming from the steppes, from the Ukraine, coming across, and it fits the time period of the Tuatha. So that's all I can say on that. I don't have a lot of time for the Tuatha De Danann, because my forte is the Neolithic. I'm fascinated by the Neolithic and what they left behind. The friend of mine, the language specialist, he speaks a lot of the Scythians, but my focus and drive is on the Neolithic, the chambers, the stone chambers. So I tend not to stray too much into the other areas, because I continually try. I love the mythology and the folklore, but I also try and balance it as well with what do we have physically that we can understand and relate to. So a lot of my work has kept me locked within the early time periods, from around 6,000 BC up until around 3,500, 2,500 if at most, and that's my time frame. Okay, great stuff. It's been an absolute pleasure.